So I'm going to transition us to this next section where we will answer questions. Please do keep putting your questions in the chat. I think we'll start off with questions for Hadley, Dunya, and Kelli, but also wanted to remind participants that we will ask you to complete a survey after the webinar has completed. We'll put that link in the chat box again. We just want to make sure we get everyone's feedback. It's really important to us as we work to make these events and webinars more relevant to your needs. Okay, Hadley, I'm going to start with you. We had a question that came in from someone who wanted to know more about the professional development that was provided to teachers and what really counts as family engagement at the middle school level. What kind of topics were covered with staff? Because they're really pointing out the difference in working with elementary teachers on family engagement and the very strong difference that you alluded to and started talking about when working at the middle school level. Were the middle school teachers receptive? Like, how did that feel and what did that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. We had two professional learning sessions. And so the first one really focused on what the research says around middle school family engagement. So to prepare for this, we did a comprehensive literature review of prior research studies related to middle school family engagement and really what works. And so the first resource that popped up was our research brief that kind of pulls together a set of strategies. And if you want to just read a really quick review of what is middle school family engagement, that's probably the best spot to start. And if you are interested in using that with staff at your school, on the last page there is kind of a note catcher that you could use. We used it for like a jigsaw activity in that training, and that would be easy to do with a staff where people get to be experts on different strategies and peer teach. And then each one of those strategies also includes the description with the research, and then also what does this actually look like in a classroom. So before joining the team at OSU, I was a middle school teacher and a middle school principal. So I'm always thinking about what does this actually look like in a building? How could we actually do this? And so we wanted people to be able to pick up this research brief as practitioners and really think like, what could I do today? What could I do tomorrow? What can I plan next year? Something really practical for people. So that was the first training, was really focused on that. The second one really honed in on why trust between families and the school is really important. And what that does for each person, each member in that relationship and their roles, why that is important for kids. And then the big key that we uncovered when we were looking at this in the research is that confusion over what our roles are is one of the things that most erodes trust. So I'm also a middle school parent, and if I don't know how I'm supposed to be interacting with the school, if I feel like I'm a bother when I'm coming to the school or when I'm contacting, or if I am not successful in the ways that I'm trying to help my daughter, then I start feeling negatively about my relationship with the school. Whereas if I'm clear about how what I'm doing helps, and I feel like the school is grateful for my efforts and that they see what I'm doing, then that helps my trust grow in the school, and that's also good for my child. So those are some of the things that we talked about in that second one. And then also during that time, we carved out some time for teachers to each write a set of personalized letters to their advisory class. So they sent home a personalized letter to each student and each student's family in their class about the student. And we used some time during that session to write those letters. So that was the focus of that. And then we actually had really good buy-in on this project. So it helped that we had good support from the administration to begin with. We sat and talked through a logic model and really ensured that we had strong partners there. And then also, I think that teachers and educators, they really get into this profession because they love kids. And so when you make sure to present research in a way that it makes sense for why this works well for kids and why this will make them more successful in their jobs, I think that educators really appreciate being treated like professionals. And so I think that really helped with the buy-in on the project. It was also a real light lift, so we tried to make things as easy for them as possible.
Thank you, Hadley. Dunya or Kelli, do you have any things you want to chime in there? Kind of similar perspectives on your experience?
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think especially in work with family engagement, you know, really the perspective that I take is that every opportunity, every interaction, whether it's digital or in person or a home visit, really using that opportunity as a place to build trust, to build that rapport, and centering that in all conversations, in all interventions is just essential. I think with the text messaging in particular, one of the things that I personally appreciate about it, and I hear from families, is it gives families a sense of control in the time and manner in which they choose or are able to respond. So rather than a phone call where maybe it's unexpected or a family can feel kind of taken aback, initiating those conversations and relationships through text messaging can be really powerful. I will often sometimes text a family or text, you know, a community partner, and just to schedule time for a conversation, just as a means to kind of offer an invitation for the conversation. And then if families aren't willing or able, you can proceed accordingly.
So Lacy, I was reading the question that was in the chat, and I think that there were some really poignant things that came out to me. So one was talking about focusing too narrowly on something like absenteeism.
Yeah, and so I think, just so I don't think that the audience has seen that question. So
okay,
if you could read part of it, then respond. I think that'd be helpful.
Oh, okay, thank you. Oh, I did something. Sorry, I'm not sure what I did. I just reduced the screen as I was attempting to make it larger. So
I could. You want to go ahead and put the context in there? So
that would be great.
Yes,
sorry, I'm like pushing things and like undoing them, unfortunately.
That's fine. No, I think I'm glad you were getting ready to comment on this, because it was a great transition into this next question, which is really asking about the broader impact about these messages that we send home and how these can influence family-school relationships, including that trust piece that we're really talking about. So thinking about outcomes related to trust, some of these broader impacts versus some of these narrower outcomes that we're looking at studying and designing these research studies on to look at something very focused like absenteeism. So I think just thinking about how this can work and really being something that is more focused on the whole child and relationship building for equity work and using text messaging for stuff like this.
I think it also depends on how you look at that. So I'm just going to speak around absenteeism. Part of that is I'm responsible for absenteeism in Portland Public Schools. So that's the lane that I should be in. But for us, chronic absenteeism is an early indicator. It is something that tells us that something could be happening and we need to be paying attention. This could be happening between the student and the teacher in terms of the relationship. So we've got school avoidance going on. There could be bullying going on. There could be needs in terms of basic housing going on. So what it does is the data begins to tell us a story where we need to begin to ask more questions and actually come from a place of curiosity and relationship building. So one of the things that we pretty much in terms of our protocol as a district, we want teachers to do an outreach after they have noticed that a student has been missing from their class for 3 days. 2 days is preferable, 3 days, but that outreach has nothing to do with attendance. It has everything to do with what that relationship is. It's like, oh, hold it. We noticed that Kelli hasn't been here. We've really missed her in class these last couple of days. She's such a pleasure because of X, Y, and Z. So then what we do is we begin to talk about the strengths as a student. So then when we're talking around issues around race and equity in particular, there was the comment saying that there was a barrage of negative messages. Well, part of it is look at the messages that you are sending home. So instead of talking about that, oh, Dunya was absent again, what about, oh, we really missed Dunya today? So there's ways, again, that we can begin to position our messaging, even if it is a narrow focus. And what we have found is that teachers who actually engage in this practice build the type of relationships with the families across difference. And the attendance coaches that we have in our system are also here to support and guide them with both the relationships and with any needs that might be that the family might present. So that's what I would say, that while yes, it is a narrow focus, it is a door in that allows schools to begin to build the relationship early and in a way that matters.
Thank you. Okay, I think we have a question next about how these texting programs were first introduced to parents and caregivers. Like how did you provide that information about the initiative starting up? Was it in-person meetings? Did they get phone calls, emails, handouts, a combination? Like really, how did you work with that initial buy-in? And I'll throw this to Hadley first.
So in our study, we initially introduced this to parents and caregivers through the template, through this personalized letter that we provided this template for teachers, and then they personalized it for each student in their advisory class. And the first paragraph of it was framed around the student's strengths, things that the teacher had noticed about the student that were positive. And then the second paragraph really emphasized just a desire to continue partnering to support this student, and then introduced that these messages were going to start coming home, and the hope that they would agree to receive them, and that that this was kind of the hope and the goal around this was to have improved partnership between the teacher and the family. And then we also, of course, because it was a study, we also had to send home our own recruiting materials, and so many of those recruiting materials are less personal, and so we felt that this was a really key piece of this study was the teachers sending home this letter that was personalized and came from a specific staff member. I think that was more powerful than had it just come home in a kind of one flyer from the school. The more personalized it can get, the more you can build relationships. I think Dunya was just speaking about that's so critical. So that's how we did it. I would love to hear how the other studies did that as well.
I would not repeat what we did. So I will just start there. We were kind of in a hurry to get things off of the ground. And so we were, since we were partnering with AIR, there was a permission slip that went home in packets. And this was like the opening day packet. And I don't know about other districts, but ours is like, okay, this is an exaggeration. It was like this thick, where parents have to go through all of this thing. But the wonderful thing about this is this was the first time that Portland Public Schools had worked with implied consent. And that means that they had to opt out of this study. They were automatically opted in. And we had never done that. And according to our legal counsel's interpretation of FAA rules, it was like, no, they need to provide express consent. And so through this study, we were actually able to switch and kind of expand our thinking, which has been really profound in a lot of other ways that we've been able to use this. But it was one form, and I remember my office just being covered in forms that we had to all get back, signed forms, and then send them on to AIR. So I would not suggest doing that in terms of including it in a packet. I'm sorry, Anja. Look, but I was going, like, we were under such a tight timeline, and like we were trying to get going, and we were trying to be responsive, like all of these things. So we also worked closely with the schools because we only did have a handful of schools that we had to work with. So part of it was making sure all of the attendance coaches were assigned to specific schools. So we had them also do individual outreach. So in case parents were kind of having their lids flipped, they wouldn't be too flipped. And we did have some, but not a huge amount.
Yeah. So what we tried to do was to really inform parents as much as possible through texts and get them to, opt out through text messaging. But because not everybody had that available number right at the beginning of the study, we had that 85% coverage. We had to reach out to everybody, whether it was through text or whether it was through a paper form. But we needed to be able to inform every parent of every child in these schools that they had the right to opt out from the study. So yeah, we had to do those paper forms. I agree with you. Nothing. And we had a large sample. So it was really. It's not an easy process, and it's definitely not the one that I would prefer. And all of that. And I think we got much better traction in places where we had lots of parents that were able to do this opting out or through text messaging, and we were able to inform them about what the study is, what is the purpose of it through text, and instead of using the paper forms. I totally agree that it is a lot of paper.
So I think this brings up this interesting kind of almost tension around knowing what you need to do around having that very relationship focused interaction with parents. It seems contextualized and tailored to them, versus, you know, sometimes trying to set up these research studies and what all of that entails in order to be able to evaluate these programs and be able to provide results like you guys heard about today around these outcomes. So that is something to think about. And we are coming close to time and getting ready to close. So I just wanted to say, like, kind of in relation to that, if folks want to just share what would be the most important things to consider when establishing a program like this or studying a program like this, what would you want to tell other districts that are thinking about doing this?
Exactly what people were saying here, that relationship building is really important. When you don't do a study about this, you have the chance to really do that relationship building in the beginning of it. And what we kind of realized, and what we would, I guess, the recommendation is too strong of a word, but I do think that personalized outreach is really helpful. And you know, if there's a way of doing that in a way that you use a real life person who can really reach out and then have that conversation and refer parents to the additional supports as needed, I think it's clearly, you know, the way to go. However, I must say that there were parents that just benefited from just the initial basic messaging that we did. That was just about informing parents about their child's attendance and providing them that information, how much their child was really truly missing school. So that was important information for the parents, and that already in the fall semester reduced some of the chronic absence. But I think that additional piece of that really personalized outreach is especially important for those families who had struggled with attendance for a longer time period. So it definitely showed to be more effective, especially for that subsample of students who had the prior high level of absenteeism that we also studied. So that's would be my take on it.
Thanks. Anyone else? Hadley, final thought?
Yeah, final thought from me is from a family engagement perspective, as a district, really think about how many different platforms you're asking families to use across your district K through 12. Because you have families that have multiple children in multiple buildings. And so if each teacher is picking their favorite platform, some families may have 5 or 6 platforms that they're using, and that's a real burden for families. So really take a family-centered approach if you're going to implement something like this, and try to pick one platform that's used consistently certainly across a building, but I would recommend across a district if possible.
Thank you, Hadley. Candace, did you have a final thought you wanted to share?
No, I just was coming on to nod. I like Hadley's final thought.
Yes. Yeah.
On the back of my board, unfortunately, you can't see it with this beautiful everyday counts poster up. There's a quote that one of my staff left me with, which is, "You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of the system." Unfortunately, I need to get the name of the person who said that. So I want to say, unfortunately, I cannot attribute it to the correct person at this moment, but it is really apropos for anything that we begin to think about, which is we are only as good as the systems in which we work in and the systems that we work to improve. And so when you're wanting to take on anything like this, whether it be text messaging on a narrow focus or anything like this, look at the system you have in place and make sure you have that as strong as you possibly can, because then you will meet the goals that you have set out.
Thank you, Dunya. I think that's a great way to close today. And we hope that these presentations have been helpful for all of you that are thinking about building these types of initiatives and thinking about how to adapt your systems to be able to communicate with parents in this way. So with that, I'm just going to take us through some final closing. As a reminder, we do want to hear what you thought. So please do take some time to complete the survey that you're going to receive. It's going to go into the chat box, the link right now. We know folks are completing a lot of surveys right now, and we would really appreciate your time. It's very important to us. Next slide. So we just want to thank everyone and have you guys please come back and take a look at our REL Southwest website. Here's some information there. You can visit our site. You can sign up for our newsletter. You can access the slides and the recording from this event. I know we've had a lot of questions about that. You'll see that information up here, and you can learn more about the Arkansas College and Career Readiness Partnership that Candace spoke to, and access the study when it comes out to find out results. Next slide. We've got some research references that you will see when you get access to the slides that you all can use to support this work in your own schools and districts. And then just lastly, please do connect with us. Follow us on Twitter. Send me an email if you have any questions about this event or future REL Southwest events, and visit our website. So thank you again. Thank you to all of our presenters. This was a great, you guys did a great job with your presentations today. It's very informative, and we really appreciate your time. Again, please do complete that survey when we get a chance, and thank you everyone, and have a great afternoon.